Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome here. I'm the Reverend Kelly Clement. I'm one of the ministers here at First Unitarian Society. And on behalf of FUS and the Hansen family, I welcome you here to this sacred and celebratory hour. We are gathered to mourn the death and celebrate the life of Steve Millard Hansen, husband, father, grandfather, brother, uncle, friend, adventurer, storyteller, lover of life. Theodore, will you come and light our chalice for us? Thank you. In our time of grief, we light a flame of sharing, the flame of ongoing life. In this time when we search for understanding and serenity in the face of loss, we light this sign of our quest for truth, meaning, and community. These are the words of the Reverend Kate Tucker. She's a retired Unitarian Universalist minister, and she writes this, and asks the question, what helps when you are living with loss, grief, and great change? It helps to expect that you will be surprised. No one exactly like you has ever experienced a loss just like yours. Your inner clock, your inner landscape, your intimate story is yours and no one else's. It helps to understand that this will take you on an unpredictable journey, and that this change is a thing that happens in your body, not just in your soul. It helps to know that your feelings can be complex and multiple. Sorrow and relief, love and anger, despair and hope can live together and yo-yo in astonishing ways. It helps when you can welcome all these feelings, show hospitality, ask them all to tea. It helps to give sorrow words. It helps to tell your heart to those who know how to listen and love you, the ones who don't mind at all when you repeat yourself over and over again. It helps to recognize that though your loved one dies, your relationship does not. It changes, it grows, it flows, it distills, it lives. It helps to remember that there are things you will never know, never figure out or reason your way to. You will never know what it was like for Steve to live his life from the inside. That's a holy secret and a sacred mystery. It helps to remember that beauty does not die. It helps to know that when grief comes, it comes as a teacher. It shows us what we fear and what we love, what we hold true. It tells us, if we listen, 100 ways to honor our loved one. It teaches us how we wish to live our days. We stand before the mystery of life and death with awe and wonder, with love and longing, with hearts tender and knees weak. So let us tell Steve's story today and in the days and years to come, that we may know what is possible in a life so well lived. Steve Hansen was born on June 12, 1947, in International Falls, to Dory and Keith Hansen, a younger brother to George, who was 3 years older. We are missing you today, George. George is not here because he's been exposed to COVID, and so your place with us, I know you're watching online, and we are holding you close today. The family moved to a house on Zenwood Avenue in St. Louis Park, from which Steve managed his paper route and his Boy Scout career, achieving the rank of Eagle Scout. He graduated from St. Louis Park High in 1965 and he headed to the University of Minnesota for secondary education. Steve wanted to be a history teacher. While he was a student, he continued delivering the paper, and eventually he and his dad Keith started a retail store in the new Towers apartment building in downtown Minneapolis, the Towers News Service. It was kind of a drugstore with papers and magazines, tobacco, more. After graduating from the university in 1969, shortly before the draft lottery began for the Vietnam War, he took several motorcycle trips around the country, and then he decided to join the Peace Corps and was sent to Hilo, Hawaii for his training assignment for Thailand. He wrote that he thought the Peace Corps would be more fun with a girlfriend. And he set his sights on one girl who thought he was kind of strange, so she brought her roommate along for safety. That roommate was Adele Grohlman. The first thing they did together as a date with just the two of them was to watch the lava flow into the Pacific from Hilo. Adele and Steve taught English in Thailand, came back to the States for graduate school at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where Steve studied vocational technical education and taught at the nearby Air Force Base. He and Adele were married on October 20th, 1973. He was careful to tell me that was the Saturday Night Massacre during Watergate. And then it was back overseas, this time to Algeria, for 3 years of teaching. When they returned to the U.S., they began to raise their family. First came Maria in 1983, and then Jenny in 1985. Of raising children, Steve said, "I think we just lucked out. Trying to control things is like trying to steer a toboggan. You're going really fast and it's pretty much out of control. You can only nudge things in a general direction." As the girls got older, Adele began thinking they ought to join a church. Steve, who grew up Methodist, was a self-proclaimed church-ophobe, but he had a dream one night when God spoke to him and said, "Go to the Unitarian Church tomorrow." He was glad to have such a clear sign. The Hansens came to FUS, here to this congregation in the late 1980s, and during that time, from that time until 2020, really, Steve was active on the library committee. He was in the seasonal celebrations team. He played Old Man Winter several times at the winter solstice celebration. He was active in Retreat to the Woods, the Science Book Club. He was a greeter and much more here. Steve was a fixture at FUS. Steve was an interested and interesting conversationalist. He took care of the people he loved, and he had a generous sense of responsibility. In August of 2021, Steve was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. Early procedures went well, but there were several setbacks, and his cancer was relentless. Even so, Steve was pretty calm about his diagnosis. The last time I saw Steve, he was thin, and to me, he seemed to have a kind of fire in his eyes. It was like he was down to his essence. It was the essential Steve. Eventually, the hospice team told Adele to call Jenny and Maria home, and they were all there with him. Even in death, Steve tried to make the timing work for all of them. He died at home on August 19th, surrounded by Adele and Jenny and Steve. He was 75 years old. Steve's body was cremated, and tomorrow the family will inter his ashes at the family plot in Maiden Rock, Wisconsin, where he anticipates good company. Those whom we love and lose are never where they were. They are now with us wherever we are. Let Steve's legacy to us be in the love of our family, the love of a good joke, the ability to tell a story, and a sense of calm amid the chaos. Steve chose all the music for today, including this song, Peace Like a River. It's in the Gray Songbook, number 100, and it will also, the lyrics will appear up here on the screen. We're just singing, no, they won't appear on the screen. Thank you. So you'll find it in your book, Peace Like a River, and we're singing verses 1, 3, and 6. Please stand if you wish. Please be seated. Maria, will you come and share some of Steve's poetry with us?
Which is the North Star by Steve Hansen. Driving through northern Minnesota, lost in the land of my birth. Am I north of Montley, east of Funkley, south of Bagley? Is this big, little, or grand? Forks, rapids, lakes, or falls? Music has 3 B's, but so does Minnesota. Baudette, Brainerd, and Bemidji. But which is first and which is last and which is in the middle? What's that up ahead? A statue of Paul Bunyan? This must be Bemidji. No, wait. Brainerd has a Paul Bunyan statue too. If I see a walleye, then I'm in Baudette. And if I see a Viking, then I'm in Alexandria. And if I see a muskie, then I'm straight into Wisconsin. At least I'll know where I am if I see a black duck. Black duck! I think maybe I'll go home then. In Minnesota, all roads lead to the Twin Cities. Paint by Steve Hansen. It's alligatored, said the people who know about paint. You can't just paint over it. You gotta scrape it down to the bare wood. So I sit, heat gun in one hand and paint scraper in the other, giving each board its turn of my full, undivided attention. Scraping paint is important work. It gives one time to ask important questions. Why am I here? To scrape paint? What is the purpose in life? To have a nicely painted garage? And finally, the biggest question of them all, how much does aluminum siding cost?
So I forgot to bring my Miller High Life shirt. So I just want to say, Uncle Steve, the Miller is in my heart. Get your motor running. Head out on the highway. Looking for adventure. And whatever comes our way. Yeah, God, I wanna make it happen. Take the world in a love embrace. Fire all of your guns at once and explode into space. I like smoking lightning, heavy metal thunder, racing with the wind, and the feeling that I'm under. Yeah, God, I wanna make it happen. Take the world in a love embrace. Fire all of your guns at once and explode into space like a true nature's child. We were born to be wild. We can climb so high. I never wanna die. Born to be wild. Born to be wild. Get your motor running. Get out on the highway. Looking for adventure. And whatever comes our way. Yeah, God, I wanna make it happen. Take the world in a love embrace. Fire all of your guns at once and explode into space like a true nature's child. We were born to be wild. We can climb so high. I never wanna die. Born to be wild. Sing with me. Born to be wild. Born to be wild. One more time. Born to be wild. For the motorcycle days.
Good afternoon. This is George, Steve's older brother, and I'm sorry I can't be with you today. But before I start, I have to give a shout out to Adele, Maria, and Jenny, who were just wonderful in taking care of Steve this last year and a half. Adele took him to so many appointments and took care of him in so many ways. Maria was there to interpret some of the bureaucratic BS from the healthcare system and to make sure he got appointments. And Jenny documented everything on Caring Bridge, and it was able to keep us all posted. And then there were all of the family and friends that came by to visit and help with things and good wishes. That was all wonderful. So now let me get to Steve. A lot of people say that younger brothers can be annoying dweebs, but not the case at all with Steve. He was always a good friend and a partner. When we went on family vacations together, we had fun together. We even tipped over a couple of canoes accidentally, and it's a good thing we both have the swimming merit badge. And then Steve helped Mom and Dad so much in their declining years. He took Dad to the VFW twice a week. He took a lot of late night emergency calls from the care center. And then he took care of the old family home in Maiden Rock that we kept for years. And he did most of the work. All I had to do was send a wheelbarrow of money about once a year. Now, Steve was always very independent. You could say about him that I did it my way. He could also be kind of rambunctious. In fact, he's the main reason that our great Aunt Vera referred to us as the hectic Hansens. And he got a little rambunctious when we sat on the balcony at church on Christmas Eve. He was a little restless, and so the usher, to keep him occupied, he asked Steve to count all of the people on the lower level. And then when he got all done with that, to keep him occupied some more, the usher asked him to check his counting and do it again. Another thing about Steve's independence, how he did it his way, was his diet. It was always unusual when he was younger. For example, a hamburger with no bun and a wedge of lettuce with no dressing. Also, Steve's early study habits were very questionable. He never liked math, although I tried to help him as much as possible. And in college, he looked for a program that didn't require any math electives at all, so he ended up majoring in history and geography. And when he was younger, all of his teachers predicted that he would be a late bloomer, but Mom and Dad kept asking, so when is that going to be? But he did bloom, and when he bloomed, he read all 33 Tarzan books. He published a newsletter called the Roman Times, and one of the top columnists, he named him Gluteus Maximus. He wrote a brilliant letter to the editor defending cats as pets. He became later in life a teacher of English, circuit boards, and airframe repair. And then he was a supervisor and technical writer in several companies, and of course, an Eagle Scout. He also had a very strong work ethic. He worked very hard, oftentimes more than one job at a time. So he was disgusted when an interviewer saw on his resume that he'd been in the Peace Corps, and the interviewer said, well, I'm afraid you'll be lazy because I picture Peace Corps workers as people that just lounge around and drink beer. Well, the beer part might have been okay, but Steve was irate, and he called the interviewer a name that's unrepeatable in church. And of course, he joined the Peace Corps out of a sense of duty to his country and others. And then he took many cross-country trips on his motorcycles. In a way, he was born to be wild. He ended up owning 5 motorcycles in all. And to show you how generous he was, he let me ride all 5 of them. And then he wrote his impressive memoirs, 200 pages, plus pictures. And we're all so fortunate that he got his memoirs done when he did. Well, Steve was healthy as a horse, always, until 2021. And then he had over a year of health problems and suffering. It was so sad to see him so debilitated. And now he can rest in peace. It's a well-deserved rest. Now, there's a few things about Steve that I never understood. First, how could he eat Cheerios with no sugar? With sugar, but no milk. And second, where did that wonderful writing ability come from? And third, how come he never ordered power windows or power door locks on any of his cars? Maybe because he was a child of the 50s. And finally, how on earth did he get to like the song Wooly Bully by Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs? Aha! It was a hit during Steve's senior year in high school. Goodbye, Steve.
Summertime and the living isn't easy. Fish are jumping and the cotton is high. Mama's rich and your daddy's good looking. Hush now, baby, don't you cry. One of these mornings, you're gonna rise up singing. Spread your wings and take to the sky. Till that morning, standing by.
So as Kelly said, my dad was many things over the course of his life. He was a brother, he was a paper boy, he was an Eagle Scout, a small business owner, a motorcycle wanderer, college graduate, Peace Corps volunteer, international traveler, English teacher, a sheet metal man, a technical writer and trainer, a dog owner, a choral reader, the head of the FUS Library Committee, a fisherman, a beer drinker, a bowler, a coin collector, a minivan driver, a friend, a husband, a father, a grandfather, a writer, and a storyteller. He liked sitting quietly with his thoughts. He loved museums and history, seeing new places. He liked to go and see what all the commotion was about. He liked to engage in a good debate and read a good book with his pipe out on the porch on a summer evening. He knew a little bit of something about everything, and he was really good at explaining what he knew. When I was in high school, a friend of mine said, "I can ask your dad anything, and he always knows." She proceeded to then ask him about tort reform, and he had an answer. I have memory after memory of sitting on the breezeway with him, his mug of Miller High Life in one hand, his pipe slowly burning along in the other while he rocked gently in his chair. He would share trivia for fun. Who was the youngest elected president? JFK. Who was the youngest president to ever serve? Teddy Roosevelt. And he would retell stories. Sometimes they were stories of his life, like the time that he accidentally set the vacant lot behind his mom's house on fire, or when he and my mom were robbed at gunpoint in Thailand, and the criminals took mom's umbrella just before it started to rain. Sometimes they were stories that he had heard, books or movies that he had enjoyed or recounted. He told me this amazing story once about this world leader who was, taking his people to victory just when the other side discovers the ability to travel back in time. And so they send one of their soldiers back in time to kill the world leader's mother before he is ever born. But not only does the soldier save the mother, he falls in love with her and becomes the world leader's father. Imagine my surprise the first time I saw Terminator. He spent many hours on his boat fishing on Lake Pepin or Lake of the Woods or Rainy Lake or whatever lake we were vacationing on. He didn't always catch much, but he enjoyed it anyways. He said it was more about the time that you spent than what you caught. Dad was funny. I remember when my cousin Eric brought his second child, Olivia, to meet my grandparents. Dad thought that her big brother, Brendan, being all of 2 years old, looked a little bored, so he borrowed Grandpa's wheelchair and took Brendan for a run up and down the hallway of the assisted living facility. The little guy was laughing so hard, and my dad was yelling, "Whee!" as they would run by. I remember thinking then that Dad was going to be an amazing grandpa someday. And he was. He played with the kids and showed them new and interesting things. He was endlessly patient, and he shared his food. Dad never shared food. He hated sharing food. You could not go to a restaurant and ask for a bite. Absolutely not. But just because he didn't like to share food doesn't mean he wasn't a generous man. I have never seen someone so gentle and empathetic towards every single dog and cat that he met. That gentleness carried over into people too. I remember him coming home once and telling the story of seeing a car pulled over on the highway in the snow, and not only trying to help the lady that was stuck, but eventually giving her a ride to the gas station so he could get a tow truck. He had a lot of stories like that of stopping to help someone along the way. I thought it was because of his roots as a Boy Scout. He would help people, he would pick up garbage, he was polite, but it was more than that. Dad really did hope for the best people, Dad really did hope for the best in people, even when he was realistic about how often people weren't at their best. He wrote in his memoirs about being willing to help someone, even if it might mean that he was going to get swindled. It was still worth it. Because even though you risk being taken advantage of, you also risk not helping someone who needed it. And he would rather help people. As he entered hospice care, 2 different friends from different points in my childhood reached out and shared that Dad had meant so much to them. They both had a rocky time at their homes, and those weren't always good or safe places for them. But they saw that the home that Mom and Dad built was a sanctuary, and that Dad was a solid father figure with unending patience and gentleness and support. When we talked about those kind words with Dad, he was surprised. He hadn't known at the time that our friends were seeking that kind of stability and kindness. He just offered it because that's what you do. I hope I learned that from him. I hope I learned to be a patient parent, to put family before work, to make fudge and rewrite songs to be silly, to storytell, to assume the best in others, and to do my best by everyone. To enjoy the journey and not worry about the ending or whether or not you caught any fish. And I hope I carry him with me when I do all of it.
it shows. I took the blows and did it my way. Yes, it was my way.
My dad would often say my mom had a certain number of words she needed to say in a day, and that would often lead to some laryngitis on her part. And today is one of those days. She's had a lot of words to say recently with us all home. So I'm going to start some of her words for her today because she's already fighting laryngitis. Here's a poem that my dad wrote, The Taj Mahal. My grandmother always wanted to see the Taj Mahal. The most beautiful building in the world, she said, takes your breath away, has some mystical air about it. But she figured she would never get to see it, and she was right. So I went for her. It's the most beautiful building in the world, I thought. Takes my breath away, has a mystical air about it. I enjoyed the Taj Mahal immensely, knowing how my grandmother would have liked it. She would have not liked it. It was too hot. The food was too spicy, and there were too many bugs. And the bed. The bed wasn't her bed in her own house. When I got home, I went to visit my grandmother. I saw the Taj Mahal, was all I had to say, and she told me about what I had seen. It's the most beautiful thing in the world, she said. Takes your breath away. Has a mystical air about it. She enjoyed the Taj Mahal through me, undistracted by the unpleasant realities.
Well, I really wanted to read this poem because though Steve and I met in Hawaii during Peace Corps training, our first of many journeys together was our vacation from Peace Corps. And we went to India to visit some of Steve's friends and see the sights. Although India in March is incredibly hot, we had lived in Thailand. It was a tropical country. Hey, we were on it. And so we went. We flew first to Nepal and then on to India. We spent a few days in Delhi and then took a bus to Agra, the site of the famous Monument to Love. All very romantic. Steve later learned that his mom had expressed some misgivings about Steve traveling alone with a woman. You wouldn't want him traveling over there alone, would you? Said his mother. Well, it was the 70s. Well, the Taj Mahal was everything it was supposed to be. It was breathtaking. We had a tourist take a picture of us with our Kodak camera. And then when we look at it now, what do we see? It's all washed out from the bright sun. And we look very young, very thin. But we were ready to keep on traveling. So travel we did. After our 2 years in Peace Corps ended, we used our free ticket home to travel through Malaysia to Singapore, flew to Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, and finally on to Paris. Armed with our Arthur Fromer's Guide to European Budget Travel, with Steve carrying a heavy Army surplus duffel bag full of clothing, we began our adventures. We realized there was a whole new continent to explore. We found hotels, we dealt with new languages, we bought a lot of bread and cheese and wine, and of course, beer. From Switzerland to Germany to Italy to Greece, and that was when Yugoslavia, trusting that Arthur Fromer's Guide and recommendations of friends, we did indeed travel cheaply. Steve decided to visit Amsterdam in July, and there he asked me to marry him. As he wrote in his memoirs, Amsterdam's a good place for cheap diamonds. So it seemed like a good place to get engaged. Well, it was. We arrived back in the US in August, and then it was time to meet my folks and friends and do a little traveling on the East Coast. And then it was on to Minneapolis so I could meet the Hansens. Our travels continued when we went to Colorado to pick up Steve's motorcycle at his brother's home in Fort Collins. Steve wanted to drive it back to Minnesota, and I thought it would be so exciting and so romantic. I didn't realize that when you sat on the back of the motorcycle in the rain, the water would come up on your back. The herd, we were doing fine until we got to Custer State Park. And there we encountered a herd of buffalo grazing on the side of the way. Well, the buffalo were on one side they had their own ideas about the motorcycle and also whose way it was. So the buffalo on one side of the road wanted to join their friends bravely on the other side, and then vice versa. When Steve went on bravely, and I kept saying, slow down, I want to take pictures. I didn't know until later that he was terrified. We married in October in '73 and spent a cold, dark winter in Minneapolis. I'd never experienced Minnesota winter. We weren't sure what our future would be, but we did know we wanted to travel. Steve took a civil service test and found out that he could be a civilian instructor at Rantoul, Illinois. And he didn't know much about what that meant, so he decided he'd drive down there and check it out. And then he came back saying, Rantoul is in the middle of a cornfield. That's the place, I've never seen a place so flat in my life. But it had some good things that were positives. One was that it was close to the University of Illinois, so we could go back to school if we wanted to. And amazingly, we had 3 friends from our Peace Corps training program who were there already. So we moved around Tool, friends, job, the whole works. First Peace Corps, and now the Air Force. Certainly a culture shift. Steve found working with the military somewhat challenging as a civilian instructor. He was civilian, so he didn't have to comply with all their rules. He really wasn't anti-military. He didn't have to comply, and he just enjoyed wagging his finger at the orthodoxy. He grew a beard, and that was aggravating to many of the Air Force officers. The airframe repair students studied from 6 a.m. to 12:30. In 12 weeks, they had to complete several projects. And Steve had a story about one of the guys. He was a large black man from Chicago. He'd had a really tough time going through the course on all of his projects, and the last one just wasn't good enough to pass. And that meant starting the course again from the very, very beginning. He looked up at the man, and the man had tears in his face. He was crying. And Steve, we talked about it later. We both thought, for Steve, it's a job. This guy, this was life, and it was a matter of great importance. While we were in Urbana, we took advantage of the time to return to school and got our master's degrees. I got entered a program teaching English as a second language, and Steve enrolled in a vocational technical education program. He took classes late in the afternoon and even into the evenings, and this prepared us for our next big adventure. Through a company created by a consortium of American schools, we signed on to work at an electronics institute in Algeria. We were hired to teach English to prepare the Algerian students for their technical coursework that would be taught by American instructors. So what are we going to do? Well, gee, we were no longer volunteers. We were paid. We were paid well. And we bought a car in Minnesota, an orange Renault car, and flew to Paris. We picked up the car and headed for Marseille, finding the hotel that our company recommended. And while there, we drove our little car onto the Riviera. And, well, we wanted to stop at Monte Carlo, of course. And the doorman said that Steve couldn't get in because he didn't have a suit, a tie. And, oh well, that wasn't the hope of breaking the bank in Monte Carlo. We headed for the travel office to book tickets to the ferry in Algiers. And the ticket agent said, "What in the world do you want to go there for? Don't do it. Go home right away." But our plan was to continue our adventures. So we landed in Algiers, and we had our first taste of the French and Algerian bureaucracy. We were struggling to understand the documentation. Everything's in French. Oh my gosh, we didn't study French. I studied Spanish. Steve didn't study any foreign language. So what are we going to do? It's not in Thai. But after several hours and a very helpful Frenchman, we got off the boat and we headed for the location of our school, and we were ready for Algeria. Unfortunately, Algeria was not ready for us. We found our way to the offices and found the students were on strike, which was very typical, and that our apartment was not ready. We spent more than a month sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with another new hire, a woman from Mauritius. And however, in April, we moved into our permanent apartment in Bâtiment 52. Our life in Algeria was very different from that of Thailand. In 1971, Thailand was a third world country with few amenities for Peace Corps volunteers: electricity, no refrigeration, no running water. We coped and we enjoyed the challenges. Algeria was what I would think of now as a second world country. Outwardly, they're the basic utilities. But remember, we're the ones that are teaching Algerian students so that they can become electrical technicians and engineers. So, it was beautiful. Our building was about half a mile from the Mediterranean. You could look out and see the sea. And unfortunately, there was no running water. And, well, what are we going to do? Well, it ran a little bit in the morning sometimes. And as soon as we heard those pipes clanging, we got up, quickly rushed to fill up our baskets and buckets. Steve was in charge of the laundry. He washed the clothes in a big bucket, handed them in the balcony. He did a great job. I was in charge of the cooking. And Boomerdus had 2 butcher shops, the dirty butcher and the clean butcher. We got chicken, lamb, beef, Steve's favorite food. And he was so happy. Unlike Thailand, he could eat American food cooked by me, and then he didn't have any rice, he didn't have any spice. So what? So then we go shopping to the closest town, and what does we see in the market? Lots of rice, couscous, seasonal vegetables, fruits, and cans of tomato paste. Cans and cans of tomato paste. Whatever was there, we bought, because we might not see it again. Once when we were in the Sahara, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, we found light bulbs, and we were all so excited. Light bulbs. We'd never seen light bulbs anywhere near Algiers. When Steve or I would go shopping, we'd ask for something, and the response was often machesh. Machesh is an Algerian French slang word for not here, nothing. And we're out of it, but we do have tomato paste. It wasn't until the second semester that Steve found his home teaching sheet metal, and thus earning him the title Sheet Metal Man. It seemed that sometimes electricians needed to make their own junction boxes and brackets. So it was a great class. Steve could use the skills that he had learned in sheet metal in his airframe repair class, and the students could practice with listening to directions, trying to follow what they were doing, making plans. Well, sheet metal has some very sharp edges, and Steve kept a large box of American Band-Aids in the classroom, and that proved very, very necessary because the students were very intrigued by the whole concept of American Band-Aids. They had, and so they would cut their hands and come up and go, teacher, teacher. And so they were even minor cuts. People often ask what we did in our spare time in Algeria. Well, we did a lot of socializing. Steve was able to find Algerian beer in town. It wasn't very strong beer, but he, as you know, he loved beer. So even the weak variety was great. Whenever a faculty member left, he would go over to their house and ask for their bottles so he could trade the bottles of empty bottles for another case of full bottles. And we would accumulate probably about 5 cases every couple of weeks, and they put them on our balcony. Well, what else did we do? We went to the beach a lot. We played pickup baseball, softball, and football. And then for Steve, no social calendar was complete without poker. He organized weekly poker games, playing for dinars, which lasted for long hours into the evening. Those were memorable events. We also traveled, usually with 1 or 2 other couples. Algeria is a beautiful country with some arable land only near the sea, and then a set of mountains, and then a stone desert, and then a higher set of mountains, and then the Sahara. The Algerian government ran hotels throughout the country, but like so many other things in this socialist world, the infrastructure was not great. So water, it was sometimes there. It was iffy. The menu was whatever was in the market. Still, it was a chance for us to get to see a place that very few Americans have seen. But after 2.5 years of adventure, Steve and I wanted to have a family, so we decided it was time to come home. We left Algeria, returned to Minnesota. Can't be a better place to raise a family, was what he said. We found jobs, found a house, raised 2 wonderful daughters, and found a wonderful community of friends at First Unitarian. Steve fit in well with this liberal viewpoint, and we celebrated the seasons in style. I hope you'll look at some of the pictures downstairs that show Steve as Father Christmas and our winter solstice celebrations. Throughout our travels, throughout our life, we've been blessed with meeting some very, very fine people. Our Thai 34 and 35 friends, our colleagues in Algeria, and our good friends here at FUS, and Steve adopted my friends from the English-speaking community at St. Thomas. We've just been so lucky. So we have many other travel stories, and I hope that we'll be able to share our memories with Steve with you. We know you have memories to share with us, and we hope that you will join us downstairs to enjoy some of Steve's favorite food, brownies without nuts. Sorry, Mibs Pearson. Cheese and crackers, and of course, beer. Thanks. Thank you so much for coming.
Solstices and Equinoxes by Steve Hansen. The solstices, summer and winter, we celebrate with drink and dinner, and songs, dances, and other gaiety here at the First Unitarian Society. Me, I'm more of an equinox man, when the days and night have equal span, when it's not too cold, not too frigid, not too hot, not too humid, and the sun does not come peeping into where I'm sleeping, forcing me awake. Nor does it go down while I'm up and around, and a walk I'd like to take. I'm definitely an equinox guy, when the sun is neither low nor high, when excessive heat or cold is not in the air. These are the days I find easiest to bear. Our passions are ignited by fire and ice, but for me, in between is nice.
Oh, these stories. In a short time, it's impossible to encapsulate a life, but you have given us so much of Steve's life, and we'll have opportunities to share more stories, laughter, tears, good food, and more downstairs. So in a few moments, while the recessional song, you'll recognize it, is being played, I'll lead the family out and downstairs, and so if you'll just wait until they're out of the assembly hall. The reception is just below us, and if you need an elevator, it's just outside these doors and to the left. Duncan, would you come and extinguish our chalice, please? Thank you. These are the words of Project Plowshares. Just right. Thank you. Lead me from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead me from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead me from hate to love, from war to peace. May peace fill our hearts, our world, and our universe. May it be so, and blessed be.